Under the late spring sun of 1943, the air above Tunisia shimmered with heat and dust. In the silence after battle, the olive groves near Tunis stood motionless, gray-green leaves whispering faintly in the wind, as if trying to forget what they had just witnessed. Amid their twisted trunks, Allied reconnaissance patrols stumbled upon something that made even hardened soldiers stop and stare. There, half-shadowed beneath the trees, rested a beast of steel, the German Tiger 712, abandoned, silent, and whole. Its massive 88mm gun pointed uselessly toward the horizon. The crew had fled in haste, leaving their prized machine untouched, no demolition charges, no attempt to destroy it. Through the chaos of collapsing lines and desperate retreats, they had left behind their greatest weapon. And for the Allies, this was not just a trophy, it was a revelation. What they would learn from this 60-ton monument of German engineering would prove far more valuable than destroying a dozen Tigers in combat. Because inside that captured hulk lay a truth that cut deeper than armor steel. A truth about limits, about ambition, and about the hidden cost of power. When Allied intelligence teams examined Tiger 712, they saw more than machinery. They saw the story of a weapon that had terrified armies, yet betrayed its masters. Not through weakness of armor or gun, but through something more invisible and merciless, its hunger. The Tiger's appetite for fuel was so vast, so unrelenting, that no campaign could truly sustain it. This revelation would echo through the entire North African campaign, a campaign already nearing its tragic end. By mid-May 1943, the Axis position in North Africa had collapsed completely. Between May 7th and May 13th, nearly 230,000 German and Italian soldiers laid down their arms in Tunisia. The once proud Afrika Korps ceased to exist as a fighting force. Among those captured were the remnants of Heavy Panzer Battalion 501, one of Germany's elite armored units, once boasting the formidable Tiger tanks that had embodied the myth of invincibility. Their story had begun months earlier, in late November 1942, when the first 3 Tigers of the 501st rolled off transport ships and into Tunis. It was the debut of German heavy armor on African soil. By December and January, more arrived until the battalion reached its full strength, 20 operational Tigers gleaming under the desert sun, their engines growling with the promise of dominance. The legend had already spread from the frozen plains of Leningrad, where Soviet forces first met these monsters earlier that year. Red Army reports spoke of armored giants that could destroy a T-34 from beyond 2,000 meters, beyond even the reach of return fire. At the heart of each, Tiger roared the same fearsome soul, the 88mm gun. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, it had been reborn into something deadlier, capable of piercing any Allied tank frontally before its target even came within range to strike back. When American forces received intelligence reports of this new German supertank in February 1943, they dismissed them at first. Soldiers accustomed to fighting Panzer III and IV tanks laughed at descriptions of a 55-ton behemoth with armor over 100 millimeters thick. Propaganda, some said, British exaggeration. Yet when they finally saw one, when the dust cleared after its first shots, they realized the truth had been understated. That truth came violently into focus on February 14, 1943, when German forces launched Operation Frühlingswind, Spring Wind. The assault struck American positions at Faid Pass in central Tunisia. Elements of the 21st Panzer Division, reinforced by Tigers from the 501st, advanced through the ridges with practiced precision. The following day, near the small town of Sidi Bou Zid, the U.S. 1st Armored Division tried to counterattack. Combat Command C pushed forward with 52 Sherman tanks against what they thought was a normal German line. But the Germans were waiting, anti-tank guns hidden in textbook ambush positions, and behind them, the Tigers, watching from farther back. When the smoke lifted, the field was littered with burning vehicles. Of the 52 Shermans, 46 were gone, wrecked or disabled. The outcome was clear before the Americans even saw their attackers. Yet the post-battle analysis would reveal something unexpected. 3 weeks later, when Allied survey teams mapped the battlefield, they discovered that only one Sherman had been destroyed by an 88 Biotometer round. The rest had fallen to smaller guns, 50 mm from Panzer IIIs and 75 mm from Panzer IVs. The Tiger, in truth, had been rare that day, but its legend multiplied in the minds of those who fought there. Its presence, real or rumored, was enough to unnerve entire units. And that became its true weapon, fear. By the time of the Battle of Kasserine Pass, beginning February 19, 1943, American forces were encountering German armor on a scale and sophistication they had never faced before. Tigers were few, but their psychological footprint was enormous. To face one meant confronting something that seemed beyond human design. Sherman tanks, with their modest 75 mm guns, had to close within 300 meters, flanking from the side or rear, for even a slim chance at penetration. Tigers, meanwhile, could fire from 2,000 meters with near impunity. The imbalance was crushing. Army medical officers began documenting what they quietly called tiger phobia. Reports described entire units freezing at the mere rumor of tigers in the area. Men would demand artillery barrages or air support before advancing. Some refused to move without it. The sound of an unfamiliar engine in the distance, the heavy, uneven rhythm of Maybach gears, was sometimes enough to halt an entire column. The Germans, perhaps unknowingly, had created a weapon whose greatest strength lay in the imagination of their enemies. By March 1943, Allied command recognized the problem. New training manuals were drafted specifically to confront Tiger fear. They emphasized reality. The Tigers were few, their mobility limited, their maintenance demanding. They can be beaten, the manuals declared, but the words, though true, rang hollow to crews who had seen their comrades' tanks vanish in flame. There was little comfort in the advice to call for artillery or air support. Against the myth of invincibility, tactics often felt like whispers against a storm. Yet, as the campaign dragged into April and early May, another truth began to emerge, one less visible, but far more decisive. The Tiger's greatest weakness was not armor, nor weaponry, nor even crew training. It was its own weight, and the fuel it devoured. The War Diary of Heavy Panzer Battalion 501, later captured and translated by British intelligence, told a story of gradual decay. When the unit arrived in Tunisia in December 1942, all 20 Tigers were operational. Within weeks, mechanical failures began to mount. By December 28th, only 14 were battle-ready. Spare parts were nearly impossible to obtain. The supply ships that carried them were being sunk faster than they could arrive. Fuel convoys were raided daily by Allied aircraft. By January 30th, 1943, just 11 Tigers remained in working order. The diary spoke of shortages so severe that some crews siphoned fuel from support vehicles just to keep one Tiger mobile. The battalion requested replacement engines, but the reply from headquarters was chilling. No engines available in the theater. By March, the number of operational Tigers had fallen to 6, not through enemy fire, but through exhaustion of men, of machines, of supply. The mighty beasts of steel were becoming statues in the sand, each one a monument to logistical collapse. Then came April. The Allies pushed forward relentlessly, their offensives breaking through every remaining German position. On April 20th, the battalion's diary turned somber. Orders for retreat, fuel insufficient for all vehicles, demolition teams overwhelmed. There were too many machines and too little time. Some would have to be left behind. And so it happened that Tiger 712, pride of the 501st, was abandoned in that olive grove outside Tunis. The crew, exhausted and out of options, likely hoped demolition charges would follow. But the chaos of retreat left no room for ceremony. They walked away, leaving behind a machine that had once symbolized German invincibility, now silent beneath the Tunisian sun. When Allied engineers later examined it, they found its systems intact, its weapon undamaged, its armor still formidable. Yet inside, they also found traces of the greater defeat: fuel lines dry, maintenance incomplete, a vehicle powerful beyond measure, but paralyzed by its own design. It stood there for days, a monument to contradiction, perfection of engineering shackled by the imperfection of war. Soldiers walked past it in silence, some pausing to touch its cold armor, as if to understand what kind of world could build something so invincible, and yet so doomed. In the distance, the wind moved softly through the olive branches, whispering over the motionless steel. Somewhere, perhaps far away, the faint echo of an 88mm gun still lingered in memory, like thunder long after the storm had passed. The chaos that followed the total collapse of Axis positions in North Africa left many questions buried beneath the dust of retreating columns and the rusted hulks of machines that had once seemed unstoppable. Among those who tried to bring order to the wreckage was Lieutenant Sue of the 104th Tank Workshop, Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. On June 9, 1943, he recorded an unusual discovery, one that would soon ripple through the Allied intelligence network like an electric current. His report spoke of a Tiger, number 712, found intact and functional in an olive grove, its massive form resting silently among other abandoned German vehicles, at least 2 additional Tigers and a Panzer III. The air, he wrote, was heavy with the smell of oil and warm metal, as if the machines had only just been switched off and left waiting for an order that would never come. The grove itself appeared to have been used as a makeshift field workshop. Engine covers lay open like metal wings under the Mediterranean sun. One Tiger had been demolished beyond recognition, an act of destruction so complete that only twisted steel hinted at its former shape. But Tiger 712 remained strangely untouched, as though time had paused around it. When news of the discovery reached Allied command, it electrified the intelligence branches from London to Washington. The Allies had been fighting Tigers for months, yet their knowledge of the machine's true nature, its strengths, its vulnerabilities, remained incomplete, built mostly on fragmented reports from the battlefield. Now, for the first time, they had a living specimen, a machine that could be studied, measured, and tested down to its bolts and rivets. Colonel George B. Jarrett, head of the Foreign Material Branch at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, received the message with the urgency it deserved. An intact Tiger had been captured. For the United States, this represented an extraordinary opportunity, something beyond the usual battlefield trophies. It was a rare chance to peer directly into the heart of German armored engineering, the most feared weapon of the Wehrmacht, now sitting quietly under Allied guard. But even the act of moving such a machine would reveal its monumental scale and the practical challenges hidden behind its battlefield legend. Tiger 712 weighed 56.9 tons in full combat configuration, a weight that defied ordinary logistics. The American M31 tank recovery vehicle, designed to pull 30-ton Shermans, could barely manage half that mass. To move the Tiger even a few hundred yards required several M31s working in concert, their engines straining in unison like a team of beasts dragging a giant from the mud. Bulldozers and other heavy equipment were called in, their exhausts painting dark ribbons in the warm North African air. The convoy tasked with transporting the Tiger from the Grove to Tunis port had to plan every mile with care. Engineers studied each bridge and road, measuring load-bearing limits, recalculating routes where asphalt or stone might crumble under the weight. They traveled mostly by night, more out of discipline than fear, though by May 1943, the Luftwaffe's power in Tunisia had already faded into silence. The night air carried only the murmur of engines and the soft clatter of metal tracks over the road. Some roads, too weak to bear the Tiger and its massive transport trailer, forced long detours through open country. A journey that should have taken 4 hours stretched into 3 long days. When they finally reached Tunis port, another test of ingenuity awaited. Loading the Tiger onto a ship required cranes that could lift beyond ordinary limits. The combined weight of the tank and its shipping cradle exceeded 65 tons, a figure that made port engineers pause and measure again. After much searching, suitable heavy lift cranes were found, and Tiger 712 was finally hoisted aboard the Liberty ship SS Samuel P. Bush, a floating symbol of American industry now carrying one of Germany's most formidable machines across the Atlantic. The voyage took roughly 3 weeks. The ocean crossing was uneventful but heavy with meaning. In the hold, Tiger 712 sat lashed to her cradle, salt air mingling with the faint tang of oil that always seemed to seep from her seams. When the Samuel P. Bush reached Norfolk, Virginia in early July 1943, the Tiger began the next leg of her journey by rail. A special reinforced flatbed car, strengthened for the immense load, carried her north to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. There she arrived in mid-July, rolling into a place where generations of American engineers had tested and studied the instruments of war. Aberdeen was no ordinary facility. It was the beating heart of the U.S. Army's research into ordnance and armor. For months before the Tiger's arrival, teams of engineers and intelligence officers had prepared the groundwork. They had collected fragments of captured German manuals, translated technical documents line by line, and compared them with reports from tank crews who had faced the Tiger in Tunisia and Russia. Brigadier General Gladian M. Barnes, Chief of Research and Development for Army Ordnance, sent his instructions clearly and without flourish. The captured Tiger was to be tested in full. Every bolt, every weld, every performance characteristic would be measured. The tests would be exhaustive: armor protection, gun performance, mechanical reliability, mobility, and the less glamorous, but critical logistical factors: fuel consumption, operational range, maintenance requirements. What the Americans sought was not merely to admire German engineering, but to understand it, to see where brilliance met limitation. Initial inspection confirmed what many had suspected. The Tiger was a masterpiece of mechanical design, both elegant and overcomplicated. Its interleaved road wheels and torsion bar suspension gave it extraordinary stability across rough ground, distributing its immense weight so evenly that it seemed to glide rather than grind over soft terrain. The Maybach Olvar transmission offered 8 forward gears and 4 reverse, allowing the tank to back away from a fight almost as swiftly as it advanced, a subtle yet telling advantage for defensive warfare. And then there was the gun, the 88mm KWK 36 L56, already legendary across every front. It could send a round with muzzle velocities exceeding 900 meters per second, its accuracy so precise that Allied crews had learned to fear the first shot rather than hope for a second. The armor impressed even the most stoic American engineers. The frontal hull was 100 millimeters thick. The turret front matched it, and the mantelet, the gun's great armored mask, ranged from 120 to 200 millimeters depending on the angle. Side armor was thinner, but still formidable at 60 to 80 millimeters. To most Allied anti-tank weapons, a frontal encounter with such protection was as futile as striking an anvil with a hammer made of glass. Yet, as the Aberdeen teams examined the Tiger more closely, something else began to draw their attention, not in its strength, but in its appetite. The German technical documents included precise figures for fuel capacity and consumption, and these told a troubling story. The Tiger carried 532 liters of fuel, roughly 140 U.S. gallons, stored in 4 tanks at the rear. Its Maybach, HL230 12-cylinder engine delivered an impressive 690 horsepower, but that power came at a cost. Even on paper, the Tiger's operational range appeared limited. 195 kilometers on roads under ideal conditions, about 121 miles, and only 110 kilometers, or 68 miles, off-road. American engineers, long familiar with the efficient reach of the Sherman, found these numbers uncomfortably low. Even accounting for the Tiger's immense mass, the range seemed shockingly short. So the tests began. 6 months of them from July 1943 through January 1944, each designed to reveal not only what the Tiger could do, but how long it could keep doing it before its own needs consumed it. Fuel tests were prioritized because they touched the heart of operational reality. American doctrine emphasized mobility, the ability to move fast, strike deep, and stay supplied across hundreds of miles. A tank that could not travel far without refueling was, no matter how powerful, a prisoner of its own logistics. On paved roads, the Tiger performed as expected. At steady cruising speed, it consumed roughly 195 liters per 100 kilometers, about 1.2 gallons per mile. With full tanks, that translated to a theoretical range of around 117 miles, close enough to the German claim of 121 to confirm the accuracy of their documentation. But when the test shifted to cross-country terrain, reality became more sobering. The Aberdeen proving grounds were designed to imitate the unpredictable conditions of combat. There were steep grades, mud pits, sandy stretches, shallow water crossings, and rough obstacles meant to test traction and torque. On these courses, Tiger 7.0's consumption rose dramatically. Over a 32-mile course, frequent speed changes, gear shifts, and idling periods drained 132 gallons of the original 140, leaving only a few shimmering inches at the bottom of the tanks. That meant roughly 4.1 gallons per mile, an operational range of about 34 miles in real-world terrain. Then came the combat simulation trials, designed to mimic the chaos of an armored engagement. Test crews performed rapid accelerations, sudden halts, quick turns, and turret rotations. They let the engine idle for observation periods and ran the radio systems continuously, just as real crews would. Under those conditions, fuel consumption rose again to 6.1 gallons per mile. The Tiger could travel only about 23 miles before its tanks ran dry. The figures painted a sobering picture. The Tiger was, without question, a superb fighting machine. Its gun, its armor, its engineering, all were near the pinnacle of wartime design. But strategically, it was a heavy burden, a giant whose strength was chained to an endless demand for fuel. Aberdeen's engineers did the math. Each Tiger required between 1,500 and 2,000 gallons of fuel every week just to remain operational. A battalion of 20 such tanks would consume between 30,000 and 40,000 gallons weekly, and that did not include the fuel needed by trucks, half-tracks, or recovery vehicles supporting them. By comparison, an American tank battalion equipped with 53 Shermans consumed roughly 65,000 gallons weekly for all vehicles combined. The German heavy tank battalions, with fewer than half as many tanks, demanded nearly the same amount of fuel. What had once seemed an indestructible weapon now revealed its hidden weakness, not in armor or gunfire, but in the simple arithmetic of distance and supply. At Aberdeen, the engineers wrote their reports in the quiet rhythm of typewriter keys echoing across the hangars. They measured efficiency not in glory, but in gallons, range, and maintenance hours. In the evenings, when the testing grounds grew still, Tiger 712 sat under the dim lights of the proving shed, its steel sides cold, its weight resting on the concrete like a sleeping animal from another world. Somewhere, a drip of oil echoed softly onto the floor. It was the sound of a giant breathing in its sleep. When the full weight of the logistics was tallied, the truth became inescapable. Once support vehicles were added, the German chassis heavy tank battalions, those proud spearheads of the Wehrmacht, actually consumed more fuel in total than American medium tank battalions, even though they fielded less than half as many tanks. It was a quiet revelation, the sort that changes how wars are understood. Colonel Barnes gathered the Aberdeen testing data and compiled it into classified intelligence reports, circulated through every U.S. Army Armor Command by October 1943. The conclusions were sobering. The Tiger tank, that iron predator of the battlefield, possessed armor unmatched by any Allied tank, and its 88mm main gun could strike targets effectively beyond 2,000 meters. Yet beneath that fearsome exterior, a hidden flaw pulsed, a weakness no engineer could armor plate away. It drank fuel like a furnace at full draw. That voracious appetite limited its operational range to roughly 120 miles on perfect roads, conditions that rarely existed in war, and only 30 to 40 miles once the mud, the dust, and the chaos of combat came into play. Every Tiger needed a constant stream of fuel trucks behind it, or it became a stranded monument of steel, and a Tiger that could not move, could not fight. Barnes's report made that point plain. The surest way to neutralize the Tiger was not by engaging its thick armor head-on, but by starving it, by cutting the veins that fed it. Intelligence officers cross-referenced the Aberdeen data with captured Wehrmacht logistics papers. What emerged was a map not of conquests, but of desperation. By late 1943, Germany's fuel system was a web stretched to the breaking point. Even under ideal conditions, their supply lines could scarcely sustain Tiger operations. And when Allied aircraft began striking those fragile lifelines, bombing bridges, strafing convoys, the consequences became inevitable. Tigers that once prowled the front became statues of war, frozen by emptiness. The intelligence also explained mysteries that had puzzled Allied observers throughout 1943. German heavy tank battalions almost never operated more than 30 or 40 kilometers from their supply bases. They avoided long pursuits even when victory seemed within reach. Their tactical caution had not been born of restraint, but of necessity. They could not chase what they could not afford to catch. Fuel, not fear, dictated their movements. Captured German war diaries confirmed the pattern across multiple fronts. In Normandy, the war diary of Heavy SS Panzer Battalion 101 recorded it with haunting precision. On July 8, 1944, the entry noted a triumph. 16 Shermans and 3 Cromwells destroyed, with only 1 Tiger lost to mechanical failure. Yet 4 hours later, the battalion sat still. The engines cooled. Their fuel was gone. The crews waited beside silent giants while the enemy withdrew beyond reach. 12 days later, another entry lamented a 40% fuel reduction and strict conservation orders. The Tigers, the finest machines Europe had built, were ordered to remain defensive only. No offensive movement, no pursuit, no glory. The words in the diary carried the bitterness of a craftsman forced to watch his masterpiece rust. Then came August 6th. The same diary reported 3 Tigers abandoned during withdrawal from the Falaise pocket. Mechanically sound, but dry. Crews had placed demolition charges, uncertain if the explosions ever took. They left on foot, turning back only once to see their once invincible tanks standing in mute formation along the roadside, silent, waiting. British intelligence captured similar reports elsewhere. From Italy, Heavy Panzer Battalion 503 wrote of Tigers halted for lack of fuel. On the Eastern Front, the 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking recorded the same story, repeated like a refrain. No matter the front, no matter the victory, fuel scarcity crippled them all. Everywhere Tigers roamed, they were tethered by invisible chains of fuel lines. American intelligence, having grasped this, distributed new tactical guidance to all armored units by November 1943. When you meet a tiger, the order said, don't stand in front of it, make it move, make it burn what little it has. Every mile drained its strength. Every repetition brought it closer to stillness. An immobilized tiger, once the terror of Europe, became a target for artillery or air power, destroyed not by courage alone, but by patience and understanding. Training films soon followed. One, titled Understanding German Heavy Tanks, became required viewing. Calm narration explained that the Tiger consumed between 3 and 6 gallons of fuel for every mile traveled, depending on terrain and tactics. The Sherman, by contrast, needed less than 1 gallon. A simple equation, yet it meant everything. On the same fuel, an American formation could move 5 or 6 times farther. Crews learned to use that advantage, draw the Tigers out, force them to chase, then strike once they stalled. By the summer of 1944, during the Normandy campaign, the theory proved true in the field. As the Allies broke free from their beachheads, German armor could not keep pace. Many battalions sat immobilized, not from enemy fire, but from empty tanks, literal and figurative. American armored divisions advanced 130 miles in just 7 days. The Tigers, even at their best, could manage only a fraction of that distance. They were magnificent machines, stranded in an age that no longer had the resources to feed them. When France was liberated in August and September 1944, the countryside bore witness to the truth. Allied reconnaissance found Tigers and Panthers abandoned along retreat routes, sometimes still warm, often perfectly intact, except for one thing: their tanks were bone dry. German crews had destroyed what they could, but many lacked even the fuel required to ignite demolition charges. The rest were left behind like relics of a fading empire, hulking silhouettes beside country roads, their armor catching the autumn light. Then came the Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last gamble. It was December 1944, and winter wrapped the forests of Belgium in silence. The German plan relied on a single, desperate assumption: that they would seize Allied fuel dumps along the way. Each Panzer division was rationed for roughly 150 kilometers of movement, barely enough to reach the first objective. When the Americans held their dumps or burned them, the German spearhead sputtered to a halt. Kampfgruppe Piper, leading the 6th Panzer Army, advanced barely 60 kilometers before its fuel ran dry. Tigers from the 1st SS Panzer Division sat stranded along the snow-covered roads near Stoumont and La Glaise, their dark hulls frosted with ice. Local villagers later recalled the eerie quiet, the engines dead, the crews huddled for warmth. Major Hal D. McCown, an American officer briefly captured by Piper's men, later testified that German officers openly fretted over fuel. They siphoned gasoline from wrecked trucks and disabled vehicles, arguing over who might get a few more liters to move a single Tiger another mile. The scene, he said, was less like an army on the march and more like one running on fumes of hope. When the offensive failed, it failed utterly. Without fuel, nothing moved. After the war, captured records revealed just how central this crisis had become. From 1943 onward, nearly every German operational plan was drafted around one haunting constraint: fuel. Each Tiger consumed roughly 300,000 gallons across its service life, enough to keep 7 Panthers or 18 Panzer-Foes in motion. Germany had chosen concentrated strength over sustained power, and when its reserves dwindled, that choice turned fatal. By March 1945, as Allied troops crossed the Rhine, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department issued its final evaluation. It read almost like an epitaph: the Tiger. I represents an exceptional design and individual combat performance, yet a catastrophic failure in logistical sustainability. On paper, it was one of the finest armored vehicles ever built. In practice, its hunger devoured its own potential. It consumed between 1.2 gallons per mile on roads, up to 6 under combat stress. Numbers that told the story better than any propaganda could. The Tiger was, in the end, a beast too heavy for the world that made it. And so, scattered across Europe, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes, the remains of those machines stood silent. Their engines, once symbols of unstoppable power, had long gone cold. Sometimes, when the wind moved through the broken fields, a faint rattle echoed through their hollow hulls, as if the steel itself remembered what it had once been. German industry could build the tanks. The Wehrmacht could man them with experienced, disciplined crews. But the same nation that had mastered metallurgy and precision machinery could not summon enough fuel to keep them moving, not under the thunder of Allied air raids that tore through its lifelines, not in a war that had become as much about refineries and convoys as about guns and armor. After the war, when the noise faded and the ledgers of industry were open to light, Allied intelligence officers sat across tables from captured German engineers, the men who had conceived the Tiger. Many spoke with the flat honesty of those who had already lost everything. Henschel's engineers, the ones who built the Tiger firm, admitted that during its design phase, some had raised concerns over its fuel consumption. The numbers looked troubling even on paper, but their caution had been brushed aside by orders from above. The Wehrmacht wanted a fortress on tracks, a machine that could outfight anything the Allies could send, and the cost, in fuel or in practicality, seemed secondary at the time. Erwin Aders, one of Henschel's senior engineers, told Allied interrogators in May 1945 that his team had calculated the Tiger's range at roughly 120 kilometers on roads, less than half that in field conditions. The report had been passed up the chain. Procurement officers acknowledged the limitation, but believed, almost with faith, that the Tiger's combat superiority would guarantee swift, decisive victories long before fuel became an issue. They were wrong, and history made sure the correction was written not in ink, but in steel left abandoned across half of Europe. Dr. Ferdinand Porsche, who had designed the competing prototype that ultimately lost to Henschel's version, confirmed the same flaw. His own design, driven by a gasoline-electric transmission, was even less efficient. He recalled how, by 1942, engineers already understood that no 60-ton tank could ever achieve acceptable fuel economy with the technology of that era. Yet the directives from Berlin were clear: maximum armor, maximum gun, maximum prestige. Logistics, the silent art that wins wars, was treated as a secondary concern. The result was inevitable. The Tiger was a masterpiece of engineering that could win battles but never sustain campaigns. It could crush any enemy within reach, but within reach was a narrow phrase for a tank that could not drive more than a few dozen miles before its fuel trucks ran dry. In the post-war years, the Tiger's story became more than a relic. It became a lesson. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College used it as a central case study in logistics courses. In those classrooms, officers learned a truth written in quiet clarity. A weapon that cannot be sustained is not a weapon that can win. Tactical brilliance means little if the machine itself cannot be fed. The Tiger, magnificent in design and terrifying in action, embodied that contradiction, a beast too powerful for its own heartbeat. Thousands of times over, across Europe's fields and forests, that truth had been proven by tanks left idle for want of fuel, their crews walking away from machines that once ruled the battlefield. Tiger 712, the captured specimen from Moura, Tunisia, remained at the Aberdeen Proving Ground for 46 years, an unmoving teacher in olive drab halls. Cadets and officers studied its dissected body, the Maybach engine, the heavy turret gears, the armor seams so carefully welded they reflected light like glass. For nearly half a century, it stood as a silent instructor, reminding every student that logistics, not firepower, determines endurance. The tank that had once terrified Allied crews now taught their successors how to avoid its mistakes. In 1989, Tiger 7-12 was loaned to Germany for restoration. It returned later to the United States and now rests at Fort Moore, Georgia, known once as Fort Benning, in the Army's Armor and Cavalry Collection. The left side of its hull and turret remain open, as if in autopsy, exposing the dense complexity within, the clutch plates, the cramped crew compartments, the tangled veins of hoses and cables that once carried the lifeblood of fuel and oil. Students still gather around it, running hands along cold steel, listening to instructors speak of its glories and its flaws. It stands both as monument and as warning, a triumph of engineering that forgot the world runs, not on power alone, but on the means to sustain it. The capture and testing of Tiger 7-12 shaped Allied tank tactics for the remainder of the war. Through it, American intelligence learned that even the most formidable weapon has a weakness, and sometimes that weakness is not in the armor or the gun, but in what keeps the engine turning. The Tiger's great vulnerability was invisible on the battlefield. It was its thirst. Once the Allies understood that, they no longer needed to match German tanks gun for gun. They learned to cut the supply lines, to let the Tigers run dry, to defeat them with patience rather than direct confrontation. That understanding did not vanish with the end of the war. It transformed American tank design for decades. When the M48 Patton rolled off production lines in the 1950s, it weighed nearly as much as the Tiger, but its engineers achieved a fuel economy of over 1 mile per gallon, astonishing by the standards of its size and era. Beneath that achievement was the quiet ghost of Tiger 7-12, reminding every designer that mobility and endurance matter as much as armor and firepower. American engineers internalized that truth. Every extra ton of protection must be balanced by the capacity to keep moving. The same principle flowed through the veins of every main battle tank that followed, the M60, the M103, and finally the M1 Abrams. All bore the influence of that wartime lesson. The Abrams, a 70-ton giant powered by a gas turbine, carries more than 500 gallons of fuel, giving it a range of roughly 300 miles on open roads. For a machine of its weight, that is extraordinary. It is no accident. It is a deliberate answer to the Tiger's failure, a promise that no American tank would again be shackled by the same hunger that doomed its ancestor. And so, the Tiger 7-12 continues to teach, long after its own Maybach heart went silent. Its story is one of brilliance undone by blindness. German industry created a weapon of extraordinary tactical power, but German logistics could not support it in the long, grinding campaigns of modern mechanized war. The Allies exploited that flaw mercilessly, using control of the skies and methodical attacks on infrastructure to render even the mightiest tanks impotent. The Tiger was not destroyed by superior fire. It was undone by the slow, invisible starvation of supply. Colonel George B. Jarrett, who oversaw captured German equipment evaluation during and after the war, summarized it all in June 1945. His words read like the closing lines of an elegy. The Tiger, he wrote, achieved everything its designers promised on the battlefield: superior armor, devastating range, unmatched protection. But it failed the deeper test, the one that determines victory across months and continents: sustainability. The Tiger demanded more than any army could consistently give. Its mechanical complexity, its fuel consumption, its maintenance needs, they all conspired against it. In the end, Germany had built an army that could not sustain its own weapons. The Tiger became the clearest symbol of that imbalance, a monument to what happens when tactical brilliance outruns strategic reality. The remains of that truth lie scattered across Europe, from the sands of Tunisia to the outskirts of Berlin, burned out hulls and rusting frames, each one a sentence in the long story of the Tiger's downfall. But Tiger 7-12 endures. It sits today in climate-controlled quiet, its 88mm gun pointing into still air. The Maybach engine that once consumed gallons by the minute will never rumble again. Yet its silence speaks. Every armor school, every logistics lecture, every modern staff college still hears its echo, the steady reminder that power without endurance is only half a victory. The Tiger could dominate any single field through force of fire and armor, but it could not reach far fields, could not keep pace with the flow of modern war. When the fuel ran out, its power ended not with an explosion, but with a whisper, the faint tick of cooling metal beneath an empty sky. The Tiger was a marvel of engineering and a monument to ambition, but even the greatest machine is bound by the simplest truths. A tank that could travel only about 120 miles on a full tank under ideal conditions, and sometimes no more than 30 miles when the guns were firing and the ground shook, could never hope to win wars fought across whole continents. The Wehrmacht learned this lesson the hardest way imaginable, through the silent hulks of their own machines left scattered from the deserts of North Africa to the hedgerows of Normandy, from the frozen forests of the Ardennes to the shattered streets of Berlin. Each burned-out Tiger became a silent witness to a truth ignored in its creation. Power means nothing if it cannot endure. America, watching closely and learning quickly, understood the message hidden in those wrecks. When engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground examined Tiger 712, turning wrenches, tracing fuel lines, listening to the rhythm of its Maybach heart, they found not just the weaknesses of a machine, but the limits of an entire doctrine. From that knowledge, they built something new, an armored force that valued endurance as much as firepower. They learned that in mechanized warfare, victory belongs not to the army with the loudest guns or the thickest armor, but to the one that can keep moving, day after day, mile after mile, when the dust settles and the fuel trucks still arrive. The Tiger, for all its brilliance, had forgotten that truth, and history, as it always does, was merciless toward the forgetful. The capture and testing of Tiger 712 ensured that the Allies never made that same mistake. Every officer who studied it came away understanding a hard but vital hierarchy of needs. Firepower meant little without the fuel to reach the fight. Armor protection was meaningless if it robbed a tank of the mobility to exploit its victories. And the best tank in the world, perfect in gun, steel, and optics, was useless without the web of factories, trucks, rail cars, and fuel depots that sustained it across long campaigns in enemy territory, under skies where the Luftwaffe no longer ruled. That understanding changed Allied thinking more than any single battle could have. Today, Tiger 712 stands quietly as both monument and teacher. A monument to the dazzling heights of German engineering, the kind that could dream beyond reason, and a teacher of the quiet, enduring truth that warfare is not won by brilliance alone, but by balance. It reminds every visitor that war is not a contest of machines, but of systems, of the unseen mathematics that bind fuel to range, range to momentum, and momentum to victory. The Tiger's problem was never in its armor or its gun. It was in the invisible arteries of fuel and logistics that could not feed it fast enough. The most powerful weapon in the world becomes nothing more than an elegant sculpture when it can no longer move toward the fight. The Tiger tank proved this lesson again and again across Europe's battlefields. Each time it appeared, it dominated until it ran dry. And each time, the Americans who faced it, captured it, and studied it, absorbed the lesson more deeply. They carried that knowledge into doctrine, into design, into the steel DNA of every armored vehicle that followed. Modern armies still whisper its name when discussing range, refueling, and sustainment. The great 60-ton beast that once struck fear across the front lines now sits quietly beneath museum lights in Georgia, teaching without a word. In the end, Tiger 712's most lasting contribution to military history wasn't the number of enemy tanks it destroyed, but the understanding it left behind. It revealed the eternal balance between tactical brilliance and strategic endurance, between what a weapon can do in a single fight and what it can sustain over a long campaign. In that paradox lies its entire story, a machine that embodied greatness, yet was undone by its own hunger. The most dangerous tank in the world was not defeated by superior guns or armor, but by the one enemy it could never outfight, its own thirst for fuel, a thirst that Germany's collapsing logistics could never quench. And so, under the soft museum lights, Tiger 7-12 rests. The steel no longer growls, the gun no longer recoils. Only the faint echo of engines, long silent, lingers in the air, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a lesson that refuses to fade.